Our very special guest today, our friend Pastor David Woolverton, is here. He's been a pastor for 35 years. He has his doctorate in conflict leadership resolution, and he is an author. Good morning, David.
Good morning, my friend.
It's always great to see you. Thank you so much for coming back to the studio.
Thanks for having me.
Anybody you want to give a shout out to, say hi to?
Absolutely. I would love to say good morning to my wife, Christine, who is the soulmate of soulmates, and all of the people whose stories I was able to grab a hold of and use in my book. I want to just give them a shout out.
So your book is called Profit and Loss, Embracing Grief, Nurturing Resilience, and Harnessing Authentic Leadership. This is book number 2.
Yeah.
What was the title of book number 1?
Mission Rift.
Mission Rift. That's a great title. Yeah, so tell us about profit and loss.
So first of all, profit is Prophet,
Yes.
profit and loss. It's a play on that term, and really, it's something that came about rather uniquely. I had been kind of narrating in my brain birthing something related to utilizing grief. But I really didn't have a sense of where that was going. And then 2 days before Christmas, 2 years ago, I got COVID. And I was quarantined for 10 days, and I had nothing but my computer. And I just put my fingers onto the keyboard and prayed, Lord, what do you want to say to your church? Closed my eyes and started typing. Opened my eyes again. But two and a half hours later, chapter 1 was done.
Wow.
And what was emerging was just surprising me. And I continued to do that every single day. And it was really a combination of taking the concepts of grief and matching it with 5 biblical prophets and what they had to teach us. If we could imagine making these historical and biblical iconic individuals human like us, would they have had emotional stress related to the messages that they had to give to the people of Israel or to the burgeoning movement that became the church?
Right.
What would that have been like for them? And so everything just kind of coalesced, and out came these words for profit and loss.
And I know you're big in training the next generation of leaders as well. And a lot of times you want to turn your lessons into how does that help us to lead? And so tell us about how profit and loss can help us to be a good leader today.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. My whole mantra and my mission in life is to mentor and multiply. And to raise up that next generation. And it really became very clear to me that we can't give away what we don't have. And a lot of the principles of what we teach younger generations, especially pastors and leaders, is that we need to lead organizations and people from point A to point B. And every time we do that, we take them through transitions. And with every transition, we experience loss. And many leaders, I know myself included, we try to avoid grief. We try to avoid pain as best as possible. And sometimes we do that to our peril because the organizations that we lead, they're going through those significant emotions of change. And if we don't acknowledge that, if we don't help them, if we don't empower them to do that, then we're actually going to sabotage the very thing that we're trying to birth, that God is trying to birth in and through us. And so the book is really about helping leaders address the losses and the grief that they experience so that they can, therefore, more empathically and empathetically help their organizations and the people that they lead go through those transitions in a healthy way.
So many times we talk about grief, we're thinking of loss of loved ones. Yes. But in this case, you're talking about other kinds of loss. What are the kinds of loss that organizations or leaders experience?
So grief is pervasive. Grief, from my vantage point, is our human reaction to change. And the more significant the change, the more significant the grief experience will be. Therefore, if I, for example, very quickly, if I walk into my office in the morning and I find that the custodian in cleaning moved my desk an inch away, I'm going to go through grief. It's going to be rather humorous, and I'm going to move the desk back. Right. But if I go to work in the morning and I find that they moved my desk out to the dumpster and they changed the nameplate on the door, then my grief is going to be more significant.
Sure.
So how do we navigate through the significant changes as an organization when we have have to introduce a new worship service and it changes the experience of what Sunday morning looks like. Or maybe financially we have to let people go. What does that feel like for a leader? What does that feel like for the organization? What do those transitions naturally happening in the life of a congregation or the life of an organization? What do those transitions evoke in us as leaders? And what do they evoke in the people that we're leading? How do we provide the best ways to navigate through that as brothers and sisters in Christ, not just organizational leaders?
Right. We're talking with Pastor David Woolverton. He is the author of Prophet and Loss. David, where is this book available? Where can people find it?
Everywhere. You can, to really simplify it, you can go to my website. It's David Woolverton, WOOLVERTON.net, davidwoolverton.net. But it's available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and everywhere you can get books.
And it's going to be available here. We are going to give you an opportunity to win one coming up just around the corner. We'll talk more with David as well. This morning, our very special guest, Pastor David Woolverton. He's the lead pastor at St. Paul's United Methodist Church in Elizabethtown. He is an author and a very long-time friend of many of us here at WJTL. Good morning again, David.
Good morning.
Great to have you here.
Thank you.
David's written a new book. It's called Prophet and Loss. I love the cover, and it has like a mosaic on it, and I understand that mosaic is kind of a theme that you have expressed in your book about grief. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, many of us may remember some of the principles of grief that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross introduced a number of years ago, that there were stages. And for a long time, we viewed those stages in a linear, sequential way. You go from one to the next, to the next, to the next. But that really didn't fit well for most people. And so then they started to think that maybe grief happened in a circular way, a cyclical way. That every year that you had to, go through certain first birthdays without the loved one, first anniversaries, things like that. Well, that didn't even fit because most people were not linear or sequential in how they had emotional reactions to loss. And so my way of looking at this is that grief is best viewed mosaically. That when a loss or a significant event happens to us, that event imprints itself onto a tile, a single tile, metaphorically speaking. And that tile is best viewed over time from a distance from the event. Because right in the event, all we're looking at is that individual tile. Our emotions, our loss, our significant experience, that's all we can see. And yet the further back we look, we see that tile is connected to other tiles, which are connected to other tiles, which are connected to other tiles. The basic principle from a faith perspective is that I believe that God never wastes anything, including our losses, to shape out the character of who we are as followers of Jesus and how we can represent a greater plan. God has a plan. Sometimes we can't see it.
Right.
Sometimes we can't experience it in front of our eyes. Sometimes we ask the larger questions of why now, why this, and yet we don't have the answers. But the greater trust that we have is that God will not waste it. He will bring it all together, and He will make everything beautiful in its time, as Solomon shares with us in the Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes.
So He is seeing the big picture of our tiles. But are you saying that other people, as we lead, are also seeing the results of that?
Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we feel the emotions and the stress of the loss, and we fail to realize that God is sovereign even over our pain. And if we can hang in there, we can trust the God, even when we don't see the loss being redemptive, we can trust God is a God who redeems all things. That's the mosaic.
So as far as the 5 stages of grief, you kind of address them in some of the chapters as well, using some of the prophets throughout the Bible. Tell us about that.
So the book is basically 5 main chapters, and each chapter is built around one of the 5 main, there are many, but 5 main stages of of grief that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross had put out. There's denial, there's anger, there's bargaining, there's depression, and there's acceptance. And so each of those chapters is basically my way of equipping leaders, pastors, and how to view that from their own life story and therefore empowering them to be better at leading their organizations and themselves through this process towards the greater, healthier framework that God has in mind. Now, in addition to each of those chapters, as a lead-in to each of those chapters, I take 5 biblical prophets, both Old and New Testament, and I help them kind of become less iconic and more real human beings.
Right.
And I extrapolate from what we know scripturally. I create a storyline because we don't know what we don't know.
Right.
And I create a storyline that helps tell their story. And I utilize their story to help create a pathway for us to appreciate and understand God's greater plan in the losses that we go through.
Very cool. This book is available pretty much anywhere you can get a book.
Anywhere.
Probably the best place to go, davidwoolverton.net. They can also find out about Mission Rift, your first book there.
Yes.
And we wish you the best for this book. I do hope that it reaches your goal of helping to equip leaders and equip the church to deal with their grief and to allow that mosaic to happen in their lives as well.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. It really is my heart to help pastors and leaders to equip the congregations and organizations to be witnesses for Jesus Christ in the world. We desperately need that now.
Yeah.
This is a significant year where conflict wants to polarize us. God has a plan, and we need to remember He's sovereign.
I can affirm that is your heart, David. Most certainly. Thank you for being here. The book, Prophet and Loss, Embracing Grief, Nurturing Resilience, and Harnessing Authentic Leadership, available anywhere you can find books, or visit online, davidwoolverton.net.